Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our second webinar on how shoppers want to pay in 2020. Today, we're going to look specifically at the Asian Pacific market. But like our previous webinars, I'm just going to wait a couple seconds just to give everyone the chance to join. Okay, let's get to it. I'm Kati Chitrakorn, Retail Marketing Editor for Vogue Business. We're an online fashion business publication launched by Condé Nast. I'm joined once again by Maria Prados, Vice President of Global Retail and B2B at Worldpay from FIS. Maria, it's great to see you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Katie, again. It was fantastic last time, and I'm really looking forward to discussing the APAC trends.
Absolutely, me too. Thank you so much for joining us, especially since I know it's kind of afternoon in Asia and it's kind of like morning in the UK where we are, but thank you as well for everybody else who's joined us today. So in case you missed our first webinar on how shoppers want to pay in Europe, this is part of a branded content series hosted by Vogue Business and Worldpay FIS. At the end of the session, there will also be a link for you to download the branded report that we worked on together. Today, we'll discuss how consumer behavior is changing in the Asia-Pacific region, how the payments industry is innovating and new options for mobile-first consumers in the area, and also looking ahead, the biggest payment opportunities and challenges that are unique to the Asia-Pacific region. So Asia-Pacific is just a really interesting place because it's so large. It covers 55% of the world's population. It spans 20 countries, 7 time zones. Like Maria, tell us what you're seeing in the market right now. What are some of the key e-commerce and payment trends in Asia Pacific, and how is it changing?
Yeah, definitely. So as you say, Katie, like APAC is the largest payment market in the world, right? And if we said like last week that Europe was like a group of very different countries, in Asia or Asia Pacific is even worse, right? Like all of the different countries are extremely different. So there isn't a region as such that would cover 80% unless you start like cutting by population or size of the market. But the biggest trend and the most important thing that everyone should remember is like digital wallets, right? We've talked about those and how they're even growing now faster with COVID-19. But even before COVID-19, for APAC, they already represented 60% of all of the payments on e-com and 30% in store, which is extremely large if you compare it, especially the in-store piece, if you compare it to anywhere else in the world. So the shoppers in Asia are already used to using their digital wallets to pay across every single channel.
I mean, that's really interesting. Like, why do you think that is? Like, are there certain characteristics or attributes that are unique to consumers across that region? And also, what regions would you say have the most opportunities? How does that impact the payment?
Yes, yes, definitely. So, like we briefly touched on it last week, like APAC and especially China, which obviously holds the majority of the population, then are very used to using their cell phone and the smartphone. And every time they go into the internet, or every new person into the internet goes through their mobile phone. So that is definitely the biggest driver for digital wallets. And you can see here in the graph, they're so used to paying and interacting with their day-to-day purchases across any type of channel with their phone that has taken digital wallets to the next level. So in terms of like differences, China, like we're seeing here, it's most of the most popular digital wallets in there are Alipay and WeChat Pay. So they pretty much kind of like split the market. And we'll talk a little bit about this later as well. But what is quite interesting around about WeChat Pay, for example, is that kind of like super app experience that they've created that can touch every single function for the Chinese shopper. But then if we look at other countries, let's pick up, for example, Australia. Now, in Australia, the biggest of the preferred payment method is to buy now, pay later. And around 20% of the shoppers are already using them. And we talked about this again in Europe with Klarna. But for Australia, Afterpay, it's Australia is the home for Afterpay, right? So that's where most of the shoppers are using it to shop online. And now it's starting to come in store as well. And then it would pick another completely different one as well. It could be Singapore, for example. And Singapore is a very card-heavy market. So shoppers in Singapore really pay by card. But what is actually quite interesting is that it's one of the largest contactless countries. So the contactless adoption is it's massive in this country at a global level. So even if you compare it with Europe, where the levels are quite high, and of course the US, where contactless still hasn't like taken off just yet.
Mm-hmm. No, it definitely sounds like there are lots of, different interesting trends going on. I definitely want to dive into that a little bit more. But I think one of the unique features perhaps of, the Asian Pacific landscape is that the government, actively pursues policies that incentivizes cashless payments so that it's like a driver for it. And then coupled with the fact that it's really one of the areas of the world that's really kind of like driven by innovation all the time. Like, how can companies leverage payment platforms to really take advantage of this growing number of mobile first shoppers that we're seeing?
Yes, so like we said before, right? Like the mobile first, the first interaction or the first payment method that they're driving are the digital or the mobile wallets. Because that's actually what you have in your phone. So definitely a must that you should be discussing with your payment provider, or you should be offering. But then another quite interesting piece are the QR codes, and how this kind of functionality has really stuck again in APAC, and shoppers really really use them, and once again across channels, right? So in Europe, we're not that used to them, at least just yet, but we're starting to see them a little bit more in store. Because if people want to find more about the product, then you'll have your phone and you'll just scan the QR code and you'll find a bit more about the product description. But at the payment at the payment step, maybe not so much. But in APAC, you see it everywhere, right? And again, best examples are Alipay and WeChat Pay. Once again, you can see when you're buying online at the checkout, you can already ask for the QR code, and people already scan it from their laptop, right? To make that payment. But also when they're in store, they would have the QR code, and again, they would scan it and make that payment. So it is actually something that is very established in the market, and all retailers should be looking at the technology that they need to enable this. And it is actually not that difficult. At the end of the day, the QR code is some kind of URL that they would take them to make that payment. And we talked also about China as the key country, but it's not only in China. For example, in India, we have Paytm, which again, very similar to the digital wallets, and it offers the kind of the super app functionality and including the QR codes.
But is it, despite all this innovation happening, is it also correct to say that there is, a large unbanked population in Asia? And like, if so, what are the reasons for this?
Yes, so that is completely right. But we are seeing countries that have pretty much one of the most unbanked populations in APAC, and very closely with Latin America probably. But actually, I would like to give you a couple of examples around APAC as well. So if we pick, for example, Japan, right, which is actually a very developed country, right, one of the developed countries in Asia, they are a very cash-based society. But the government has been putting a lot of incentives to move to electronic payment methods. So you're even seeing that the government is funding discounts on products if you're making the payment through an electronic payment method. So this is also pushing the growth for, again, mobile and digital wallets in this case, like Rakuten Pay, for example. Yeah, but it's also quite funny because obviously paying with cash in an online experience is quite tricky. So these countries, and especially Japan, have payment methods that we called post-pay, which would be something like a combini, that basically you just select that payment method in your online experience, and what it does is it just gives you a code, and you would go and take it to your 7-Eleven or your convenience store, and at that point then you would make the cash payment, and then that's when the order will be processed, right? I mean, if you think about it, if you're not used to it, it sounds like the most horrific shopper experience ever. But actually, just because the shopper is so used to and wants to pay with cash, then they would actually select it, and they find that that is their preferred payment method. But as we said, these are like, we don't think that this is going to grow in the future, as there's a lot of investment into the financial infrastructure and a lot of push from the government. And then another example, and if we go even more to the extreme, would be Thailand, for example. And Thailand, from the countries that we've looked in our report, it has the highest cash share of all of the payment market. So, but in here again, we are seeing that the government is making a lot of investment, and it's really wanting to make sure that all of the population has access to some kind of electronic payment method. So we'll start seeing more and more growth of digital wallets, like we've been seeing in the other countries.
No, it's really interesting what you said as well, kind of like how the increase of, e-commerce and online means that they can't necessarily use cash, or they're finding new ways to go about doing so. And that, 'cause I was thinking as well how, platforms like Alibaba have a huge hold across the whole of Asia. And I was just wondering, I guess, are they the ones then who are helping to move Asian Pacific societies away from cash? And I guess, looking forward, which countries do you see as are being closer to moving away from cashless, and also why? Like perhaps other market specifics you would say that are related to the pace of becoming cashless?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest drivers is innovation, right? And because cash would establish where either the financial system was not developed enough, and actually this is a very this kind of happened across all of Asia, right? Either access to banks was very difficult, but it was also very expensive. And trying to like, for a regular person trying to get like a bank account, it was definitely a pain, and it was extremely expensive for them. So you had like two options: either the government invested on that kind of infrastructure early enough, or you would start to see a lot of innovation coming up to fill the gaps for those shoppers. And that's definitely what has happened, at least in China. And now we're seeing that also a lot of the governments, like we've said before, have started to step up to make that investment in that financial infrastructure and that payments infrastructure, so that we can get it to an optimal. But in the meantime, a lot of these companies have started to come up with their own payment methods that are 2 steps ahead, right, from the traditional banking system. So then the question would be that if now the shopper can go directly into a digital wallet and might start topping them up, or they're already used to these like super apps where they have all together, including like chatting with your friends, then would they move away? Well, probably not, because they're already like 2 steps ahead. And as China becomes more open, and of course even all of the Chinese people start traveling much more and start spending a lot of money in their like neighbor countries, then even the retailers need to start offering this payment method. So all of the shoppers start getting used to it, even if you're not Chinese and you cannot have like a WeChat Pay or an Alipay account, but then they start seeing that there's like a better way to make a payment. And that's when you start seeing the Rakuten Pay, for example, or any of the other million new wallets that are coming up on each of the different countries.
Well, that makes sense. So this is the graph that we also showed during our Europe webinar, but I'm bringing it up again because it has a lot of relevance to, you know, what you're about to discuss. I suppose for our audience who wasn't able to tune into our last session, like, are you able to explain this graph and why is the Asian Pacific market so low down?
Yes. So yeah, like if I clarify very quickly again what a buy now pay later payment method is, you have like two sides of it. So the first piece is when a shopper buys a product and you don't pay until you've actually received it and you've liked it and it's the right size, it's the right color, it's exactly what you wanted. So then that's when the money gets taken from your account. Yeah, and that's how companies like Klarna, which is extremely large in Europe, and Afterpay, extremely large in Australia, started. But now, as these payment methods evolved, they all started offering as well what we call installments, or like pay like in 3 or 4, split the payment in 3 or 4 instead of having to pay the whole amount at the beginning. And once again, this was more or traditionally used for very expensive or high ticket items like furniture, and it still is. But now, because these payment methods had established this very loyal customer base that really want to pay with them, and they would pay for any kind of product, even if we're talking about, like we were discussing, like fashion. For fashion, it works extremely well because you want to try it on before you actually make the payment, right? So yeah, like, and it doesn't have to be luxury again, like the regular fashion items, you could have like a £30 skirt or whatever, and you can still pay it in like 3 or 4 installments. So so that has landed extremely well, mainly in countries that are not averse to debt, right? So when shoppers are very used to like asking for debt to buy things, then this type of payment methods work well, because it's not really debt, because you don't have an interest at all. So it's way better than going and ask for a loan, but the shopper feels very comfortable in that kind of environment. Australia is one of the top countries in terms of like debt worldwide. So they're very used to consuming while asking for loans. So this has landed very, very well, and especially with the new generations that don't have that much access to loans or any kind of debt from a financial institution. They are part of these payment methods. And then they can still pay installments without having to pay for any interest. And from a retailer perspective, this is fantastic, because now they are opening their target customer base to pretty much anyone that now can afford it, that maybe before they couldn't.
And like, what are the disadvantages to this payment method? I mean, and how does it fit in terms of like what do you see to be the biggest challenges facing the payments industry as well in Asia Pacific?
Yeah, so in terms of like every payment method has advantages and disadvantages, right? So the more from a retailer perspective, every time you add a new payment method, it creates a lot of complexity operationally, right? Because when you just use cards are extremely regulated by the card schemes, right? Which are like the Visa, MasterCard, the Amex, China UnionPay, JCB, and those guys define the rules, and everything happens exactly the same way. When we start talking about what we call alternative payment methods, each one, it's a completely different world. So like, when I talk to retailers, I'm always saying this is like the jungle, right? There are no rules, and each provider is going to define how it works. So if you as a retailer need to make sure that you can handle all of those payment methods, right? And that adds a lot of complexity. Now, once again, you need to balance the user experience and what's best for your shopper with the implications that you're going to have on the back office. And of course, you can and you should always have a payment provider that is like your partner is going to help you set it up in a way that is going to be manageable and especially scalable. So that's the first thing. The other thing that the other impact is the price as well. So some payment methods are more expensive than cards, or the other way around. Some are way cheaper. Like bank transfer is way cheaper than accepting cards because you don't have the interchange, which is like one of the biggest pieces of the cost of accepting a card. Right. So that's another thing. And I think the third one, which is extremely relevant to retail and especially fashion, are returns and refunds. So sometimes you as a retailer, when you offer a payment method, you might not be able to get to do a refund because you don't see any bank details or any kind of details from the shopper. So it is very important that you really understand which are the payment methods that have this refund capability already automatically embedded. And if not, then you would have to decide, okay, how am I going to contact my shopper when they want to return a product and I need to give them a refund to know where I'm going to have to send the money to. Right. So those are like just some examples that that make all of this even more difficult.
Definitely. And you touched on it a little bit just now, but I mean, beyond just making payments digital, what other interesting options are you seeing in Asia Pacific? Like, I know you mentioned QR codes. How popular is that across the whole region right now?
Yeah, QR codes are definitely extremely popular. And as we said before, like China and Japan probably kind of leading the way across APAC. But you also have in there like biometrics, and this is actually really, really interesting. And we were saying that, like, for example, face recognition payment in China is estimated to already have almost 120 million users, right? Which is tremendous, extremely high. And again, why and how these things happen, a lot of innovation comes from APAC, and you can even see when you're looking at the fintech startups and the funding. Most of the funding for fintech startups went to APAC last year. So we definitely expect, and we're always looking at what are the trends and what's going to be the next push that is going to come from APAC and especially from China. So in this case, for face recognition, a lot of it is because, again, the public sector has really pushed for it, and they've used it as well to kind of for surveillance and to kind of like have a bit more of control. That has a lot of implications, obviously, for any other country that is not China, into how well accepted would that be from the shopper perspective, into do I want to share my details or not, and to what point am I okay to share this information, right? Because things like face recognition, it could be fantastic. And imagine the user experience when you enter in store and they already know who you are and what have you bought before, what are your trends, and actually then you just don't, your payment is just like you saying yes, or like looking at the screen and just like nodding, right? Fantastic, no obstacle. But like how comfortable will people feel like doing that, and what is the right exchange of information? Because what we are saying at Worldpay, and we touched on this a little bit last time as well, is that people and shoppers are okay to share information as long as they feel that the value they're getting in return, it's worth it, right? So, but then there'll be a point into it like, well, I'm sharing too much and the value I'm getting is not as high. So then they just like stop into like, no, then I just don't want to go that far, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about really understanding your shopper and what are they going to be comfortable doing. But as we said, like as regulation like PSD2 starts in Europe, like we touched on last week, this is going to require some kind of biometric to authenticate yourself. Now, if people feel a bit more comfortable putting their fingerprint rather than their face, then we'll have to wait and see. But also, Worldpay, we did a pilot once, actually in our canteen in our office here in London, where you could pay in the canteen, and the pet had a camera, and then you would just like look at your face, and if it was you, then the payment would go through.
Wow.
Yeah, which was fantastic. But again, like what's going to be the uptake and how ready the market is? China definitely is, as it always is. And then the rest of the world will probably follow.
No, I think you're definitely right in the sense that customers want a payment method that is convenient, but they want to know that they are safe as well. And I mean, you touched on like QR and biometrics, and what about gaming payments? Is that becoming more popular? Is that tied to facial recognition, or how does that work?
Yes, so actually that is quite interesting, and I was reading also an article the other day about this new company that has completely readjust the online shopper journey, and still selling fashion, but it was no longer kind of a catalog display, which is what an e-com website is now, right? Like, this is my catalog, find your way through the universe and segments and get to the product. But it had turned it more into a kind of a game, and trying to completely redefine how the shopper would shop and make it more engaging and more as a game. Which is extremely interesting. From a payments perspective, what we are seeing more around this is very related to virtual reality, for example, right? So the virtual reality takes you into this kind of experience, which somehow it could even be a game as well, right? Like and then how and the payment piece is like right now so inconvenient. And again, I think we touched on this last week, because you right now have to take off your headset and then go on wherever and make the payment, however, right? But if they're already selling you that like camping tent, and you're already in the woods and you've gone inside the tent, and that is exactly the one that you wanted, you just want to buy it in there, and then you needed the sleeping bag, and you're like sitting in them, and that's the one that you want, you definitely don't want to leave that experience to continue that payment, right? So we've done some innovation, and again, we have like a couple of pilots where you can actually make that payment using either digital wallet or a card payment in that environment without having to leave it, which I think is fantastic. And if you move to other verticals like actual gaming, that works extremely well. Like if you are in this like video game, and I cannot name any because I don't play any of the video games, but whatever it is that you like to play, and you need to buy this extra key that is going to open that new door, you just make that payment right there, and without leaving the game, and then you just get the key and just open and go to the next level or whatever it's going to look like.
That's quite exciting future for that to be able to happen, definitely. I think the other thing I wanted to talk to you as well is about, unlike Western markets like the US or Europe, I think social media channels in Asia are not just networking platforms. We know they've always been digital marketplaces. What does this kind of social commerce as well mean for digital payments?
Yeah, so it has a massive impact, right? So and And I want to give the example of WeChat Pay, which I think what they've done is it's fantastic, because they just realized that the power of the people that you trust and your friends into increasing conversion is way better than anything else that you could have, right? So online, we've tried to replicate that back 10 years ago with giving like product recommendations, like people who bought this have bought this, or things like that, which now seems so dull. but what is really exciting is you already have your community in there. You're already chatting with them constantly. If you apply it to fashion, you're even trying something on, you can just take a picture, share it with everyone can have a comment, oh, this is going to be great, or you can wear that in this other event that we have. And then again, within that experience, you just click pay and you just have it, right? So it is fantastic. And it started with the community, and then the payment came after, right? Because once again, I mean, when you're working in retail, payment needs to be one of the discussions that you have at the very, very beginning. If you cannot take the payment and if you cannot deliver the product, then nothing works. So yeah, really, really exciting what they've done, and many others have followed, right? Like we have Grab, for example, in Singapore. Again, that includes everything from like Uber rides, which is not Uber in Singapore, it's Grab, but like you can get like the taxis, you can get the delivery meals, you can start like building new communities. So they are just becoming they're just becoming their whole, you said like marketplace, but it's bigger than a marketplace, because it touches it's not just for you to market or whatever, it can also be for you to just talk to your friends. So it is definitely, it's like a new social, a new community that then has the market kind of included into it. And once again, in India, we have like Paytm that has done something very similar. So from a convenience perspective, it's amazing for the shopper. Now, you need to have a country that is ready to take something like this on, because what we're now seeing is that due to the success in APAC of this type of like super apps, a lot of them kind of have started popping up in the rest of the world. But again, like, would they take on, and are they actually going to be able to take such a large market share? We will have to see, because once again, in China, they appeared because there was no option.
Yeah.
So just everyone had to go to that. So that, I mean, that's a great kind of like success story. Like, you have no other option. But then now in like the US or in Europe, you have a lot to pick from. So how and when, and everyone wants to have a direct touch with the shopper, right? So when you talk to brands or when you talk to any retailer, they want to understand and they want to engage with the end shopper, of course, and they should. So even using a regular marketplace becomes a challenge many times. So being kind of part of that like super app, then that would require a lot of other challenges across like managing different channels as well.
No, absolutely. And like, looking ahead, what would you say kind of excites you the most about the payments industry in Asia Pacific? And how do you see the market evolving, and ultimately how can companies thrive in this region?
Yeah, so like we've said, I think that innovation is fantastic and it's only going to get better. So anyone that works at fintech like I do, or anyone interested in payment, should be definitely looking at this region and be not only looking, actually being a very engaged and involved part in the region, right? So because you want to be part of that change as well, and you want to make sure that you're part of the innovation and taking payments once again, not one step further, but two step further, and lead the way, which is a lot of what we do. So yeah, we were talking before. Anything that starts in Asia kind of ends up moving everywhere else. So digital wallets is the first one and the most obvious one. So they kind of started in there, and then everyone kind of like has started following. Even though like buy now pay later is such a small percentage, but it kind of also driven mainly by Australia, so it kind of like started in there as well, right? Contactless, like Singapore is the largest country around Singapore. So I'm extremely excited to work in that region, and I'm really excited to see what's gonna come out of it. Now, it's, as we said, it's like a very, very tricky region, and you can't conquer it all with one solution. So you're going to have to be adapting, and you're going to have to be localizing to the different currencies, for example, the different payment methods. So and even the different regulation, as we said before, like it is nothing is like standardized. So the opportunity is massive, but also the challenge is quite large. So so everyone should be getting all of the information that they need. The more documented data, research like the one that we've been doing, to make sure that they understand the shop, and then they can make the informed decisions on what's best for the company.
Sure, no, thank you so much, Maria. We've kind of run out of time. So just to quickly summarize, today we've discussed that Asia's fragmented payments market might seem a bit daunting for some companies who want to expand globally, but there's huge opportunity in the region. It's the largest in the world, as we've discussed, with digital wallets being the leading payment method. And to attract and retain customers, providing a seamless checkout process and payment methods is now like a must for companies, as well as the opportunity to engage with customers through high quality and differentiated spaces. We also discussed how QR codes, super apps, buy now, pay later, and increasingly face recognition. I mean, while it's predominantly in China, we'll see how that develops throughout Asia, but they are the leading in innovations in payments in the Asia Pacific. But it is vital for retailers to continuously adapt how they understand and connect with their customers across all channels to provide a personalized experience that they need. For further reading on this topic, you can see the branded content research that was conducted by Vogue Business and Worldpay FIS, and the link to download this will be at the end. And now we'll move on to some questions from the audience, which you can enter through the Q&A function on Zoom or email Vogue Business directly. We haven't got a lot of time, so we'll see what does come in. But the first one we received earlier on was that we talked about, you mentioned just now how the Asian payment sector is a bit more mature. It begins here before spreading elsewhere across the globe. Like, what kind of lessons can there be learned from there for other markets? And you mentioned digital wallets would be the first to really take off.
Yeah, no, for sure. So as we said, like when someone is looking for what's next and what's going to come next, they should definitely be looking at APAC, and especially at China. And because and digital wallets, like we said, has started there and then is now growing massively everywhere. But not only that, like, because the trick and the main driver is that now, especially China, is a way more open market, right? Like, and Chinese people move around the world and live around the world, but they've already experienced that much better payment experience before, so they want to still use it, and they want to still pay with those payment methods. So for example, in the UK, we have a lot of the luxury brands in the UK that are offering Alipay and WeChat Pay, because of the all of the Chinese tourists that come, or even all of the Chinese people that are living in London. Very similar happens in France, in Paris mainly, right? So wherever you have like the community, and then everyone starts seeing, and then the trend kind of sticks. So, and you see, and we were talking about like super apps, for example. And again, WeChat Pay done a fantastic job in that, but now we're seeing that WhatsApp, more in like Europe and a little bit in the US, is like starting to add like a payment leg into it, right? So and like social commerce, like with social media platforms, like very similar. Like you're having like Facebook Messenger that is now like you can upload your product catalog and that you can pay them. You can make the payment on the chatbot directly, which is fantastic. And Instagram, like taking again like steps into how do we make these shoppable features more seamless rather than a pure buy button that redirects to the brand website. So the whole industry is just like following up, and there'll be plenty more, I'm sure.
Yes, for sure. Another question we received was in online shopping, are you seeing trends in split payments between peers?
Yeah, but like very interesting question. So actually, we see it more in industries like hospitality. So for example, in like restaurants, where where like you have to like split the bill amongst a lot of people. That is actually very common in Asia again, and again in China, and WeChat Pay and Alipay allow for this kind of functionality to do like a group payment, or for someone to buy your coffees for everyone, and everyone to make the different pay their coffee back to that person, right? I don't think it's a trend that has really settled anywhere else other than in APAC, to be honest. We've seen in the US companies like Wish.com, for example, which kind of started more like as a group. Oh, we want to do a gift to someone for a birthday, so we're going to take different payments. But as in and we've seen retailers, I think the way of a retailer online to do this is asking the shopper to create some kind of like wish list of and then starting to open it up for whenever it's your birthday, and like people to go and shop. But we haven't seen that really sticking as much as it has in APAC.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Maria. That's all the time we have for us today. We've already gone a little bit overboard, but it was wonderful speaking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
Yes, thank you so much, Katie. It was fantastic. And yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to also listening to the one about the US next week.
Absolutely. For everybody else, if you have any further questions or feedback, you can contact Maria of Vogue Business, and our contact information is on the screen now, alongside a link to the report which you can download. Thank you all for listening. I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Bye.
Bye.